Hello and welcome to video 2 of working with foundations for emails. This video is going to go a little bit more in depth with column structure and working within that grid structure to help you build your emails. So I'm picking up with where we left off in the last video. The only thing that has changed is I adjusted we had our column 1 and column 2 for a 2-column grid here. So what I've adjusted just so that it's a little bit easier to see in this video is I've added a 1-pixel solid black border to each of these table head classes. So here's column 1, border 1 pixel solid black, the same thing on the other column, just so that you can see where these columns actually are in reference to the page. It just makes it a little easier to visualize as we get started in this. So, as I mentioned before, Foundation for Emails is in a 12-column grid. That's really important to remember and keep in mind as you design your emails, is that since this is designed to be mobilely responsive, so your email, you want to think about really 2 different breakpoints in Foundation for Email. That's different than making a website. We're not making a website, we're making an email. So you have a large breakpoint and a small breakpoint. Large would be an email client on a desktop, and the small breakpoint would be the email client on a phone. So whenever you test and preview your emails, you want to check it on a desktop email client as well as how it looks on a phone, and make sure that that's previewing okay. So right now, the column classes that we have is at a small size is 12, and at the large size is 6. So since it's 12, 6 plus 6 is 12. So this perfectly takes up half and half. And then at that small breakpoint, you see that it jumps and it takes up the full 12. This is behaving as we intended it to. Now, if you wanted to have something interesting like a sidebar in a main column, or you don't want to be perfectly half and half, you can adjust these numbers to look a little bit different. You just want them to agree. So when I add large plus large, it's going to equal 12. If they are bigger than 12, it's automatically going to drop to the next row down, or the next line down. I shouldn't say row. So if I want to offset this a little bit and make this first column a little smaller, so let's say 4, then I need to add on and make this 8. So 8 plus 4 is 12. I'll save this, refresh here, and you can see that this is now a little bit offset. Column 2 is now wider than column 1, but then on that small size, it still takes up 12 and 12. So you can adjust this any which way you want to. If I want to make this, flip it, but good practice is to always make sure it equals 12. It doesn't have to. It can be smaller. It could equal to 11 or equal to 10, but you're just going to have some dead space then. So it's good practice to just make sure that that takes up your full 12. So large. Let's see what happens when I make it 10 and 4, which is going to be bigger than 12. It did push it out a little bit, which actually looks pretty good. But let's make sure that actually takes up 2. And that looks more correct. So be sure to keep it to 12 just for best practices and ensuring that you're going to get the rendering that you would like. So let's go ahead and make another row below this, and we'll do a 3-column layout. So now I'm going to add the 3 columns below here. So if you remember that in good practice, if you said this is 1 row of information, I want something to come down to the next row, I'm going to make a new row for it so that way things are not floating and aligning weird. So I'm just going to navigate into my code. I see my table class of row and then my end of row here. I'm going to just highlight that whole section. And I'm going to copy, so Command or Control C. I'm going to open up right below the end of that row to create a new row, and I'm going to paste that in. So I've just duplicated a row just like we've done before. Let's save and see what that looks like. Boomji, that looks great. Looks exactly like what we've got. But I want to make this 3 columns instead of 2, and I'm going to make 3 equal width columns. So this is a pretty quick change. You can see here's 1 and 2. So I'm just going to copy my second column here, which starts at this table head tag and ends at this table head. So I'm going to just Command or Control C. And right below that, I'm going to paste that in. So right now we're not going to have, you see I've got a large 10 to 2. We're going to have some agreement problems. So I'm going to make this equal width. So it's all at the large size, it's going to have a column number of 4. So each column is going to take up 4 to make 12. 4, 4, 4 is 12. 4, 4. So now this is going to be equal width columns. I'll rename this one to be column 3. And then one last thing I need to do to fix this is you see that, all right, at the small breakpoint, this takes up 12. Large breakpoint, it takes up 4 columns. Then I have first and last, but I can't have 2 last. First obviously would be the first one that goes, last is the last one. So what do I put down for that middle column? I put down nothing. I need to remove that last, so that way I've got first, middle, last in order. I'm going to go ahead and save that, refresh here, and there are my 3 columns in equal width showing up. So here they take up 4 columns of space, so they're equal because they're each 4. And then when I collapse, they all take up 12. So that is that's another way you can style your columns. So let's just review this code real quick, just so you can see what I've done here. Break it down. This is the row for the first one, those uneven, column 1, column 2. At the small size, it takes up 12. At the large size, it takes up 10. This is first, this is last. So that's all within a table head tag, a table head tag. Then I end my row. I have another new row. Within that table row, I have a table head tag for my column 1. It is styled small 12, large 4. This is the first. Then I have my middle. Then I have my last for columns 1, 2, and 3. So then even though that these all have different measurements, once it hits that small break point, they all equalize out. And you can adjust the small size too. You don't have to make it 100% of that size. If you still wanted this to take up 6 and 6 and be a 2-column layout, even at the small break point, you can do that. You would just change what it reads at the small size. Just remembering to take up 12. These numbers need to equal out to 12. So you can see 4 times 3 is 12. That's how you do your measurement, and that's how you determine what are the first, middle, and last columns within your coding. So just being aware of these semantics as you code this is going to give you, and setting up your column guides, even before you start to bring in your styling. I think it's very helpful to set up when you sketch this out, when you build a prototype in, say, Photoshop or something, figuring out your measurements, and you can just rough out this type of column organization before you start bringing in pictures and text and doing any of that CSS styling. It'll really make it a lot easier for you to build if you just build a rough gridded layout here first with your code and style second. So let's take a look at what this expander class is doing. You may have seen that I have this little table head with a class of expander at the bottom. And you may be curious as to what that is or why that would be there. So I'm going to switch over to Foundation for Emails. I recommend bookmarking this site when you start working because it's got a lot of good information. This is where I've pulled all of the information for these videos from. The expander prevents a rendering bug in Outlook that sometimes keeps columns from expanding to full width. So if you are making your style and you said, I would like these things to expand to that nice full width and go as far as they can go, you're going to want to put in that expander tag. It's not going to look like it's doing much here as you're programming. Again, this becomes more into the output once you inline everything and you put it into an email client and you send it and it gets opened in Outlook. It's really to prevent that bug from happening. So as you're coding, you may say, why do I need this? It's not really doing anything for me. That comes more in the testing phase. So just being mindful of that expander tag and what that means and why that's in the code. Another class that we can add to further style this columns would be the collapse class that is added to your row. So by default, there's a little bit of padding on each of these rows. That's why the text is not hitting the edge. So if you wanted to make, let's say, a graphic or your text go the full entire width of that container that you're putting it in or in your column, you can simply add the column or the class of collapse into your row. So table class row, that's row collapse. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and you can see that that pushed that over, so that eliminated that padding on those. So I'll do that to this one as well, just so you can see it again. Row collapse, and those have all collapsed as well. So now this will go that full width. So that probably works a little bit better for graphics or images if you don't want to have that spacing on either side of it. But adding that row of collapse will allow that to eliminate that padding. Another thing you can do with your column spacing is to add an offset. So you can add offsets when your numbers don't equal 12 in those column widths. I don't love doing offsets because I think they can get a little funny sometimes. So I think best practices, and there could be a case for reasons why you would use them. I think best practices are usually to try and get them to equal 12, but you can add in a column offset to make everything equal to 12 if you don't happen to have your columns already equaling 12. So to see what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and change this large one to 7, and then we can see that that is going to equal 9. I'm going to refresh that, and you can see I've got this extra little bit weird that's sitting over here. So I can add that large offset. So in my class, so I'm going to type it out as large offset 3. I'm going to save that, refresh, and you can see that that has offset and added that extra space, which is now pushed this over to make it take up that 12 columns. So you typically want to add, if you're adding an offset, it should end up equaling 12. Otherwise, you can get unexpected display issues. So anytime you want to add those offsets to basically think about it as pushing your information over to the left. So it's pushing from the left. You see how this had been without this, column 1 had lined up with this. I added 3, so it pushed all that information over to start here. Please note that this doesn't really work when you have a collapse on your row, because that's eliminating that padding. So it really isn't going to work correctly. So let's try this one more time. I'm going to go ahead and navigate down here to these 3 columns. So I'm going to change this large one to being 1. We'll save that. We'll see what that looks like. And you can see I have that extra space there. So I'm going to add a large offset of 3. So then 3 plus 1 plus 4 plus 4 is 12. And then even though that information is really still only going to take up that one column, it's going to push it over. So that's what the offsets will do. If you would like to offset your column, you can do some interesting things with it, but personally I find it to be easier coding wise to always make sure things equal 12. But if you want to use offsets just as you imagine them, as you lay your information out, it's just going to push the information from this left side over. So here is the offset here, and this information is still taking up only one column of my grid. So thank you for watching my video on working with grids in Foundation for Emails, and I will see you on the next video.